So, I, I realized that I start almost everything that I do, audio recordings, audio logs, videos, with the word so. All of the time. That or hey guys. Hey guys. Or so, da da da. But that's just because I'm unprofessional. And I have my glasses off because when I have them on, there's a glare from my two computer screens that goes on my eyes and you can't see me. But, okay. So last time I talked about Star Wars, and I don't care. I don't have an idea for this video. I guess I can talk about the books that I read last year. So this is a book club video now. So book club 2017. I started book club in 2017 as a way to try and start a YouTube, not a career, a YouTube presence. Like I put online ideas. Like I was like, hey you guys, what should I do? I have a fucking webcam. And I don't think I was using my mic back then because I didn't have this mic. But I was like, oh, what should I do on the internet? And some people were like, oh, talk about books. You write and you read. Talk about books. Book club. I'm like, okay. So last year, my first video, I did it about this book I was reading called Boneshaker, which I hated. And then the second video I did, which was heavily edited and looks terrible because my editing was terrible, was also about Boneshaker. Boneshaker. I wish I had editing software so I could edit this piece of garbage, but it's probably going to go up unedited because I don't have editing. I don't have editing. God, fuck. I don't have any editing software. There we go. Thanks. So if you guys can recommend anything that's super cheap or completely free, thanks. Anyway. So I started book club last year to talk about books, and then I completely dropped it because A, I wasn't getting any views, B, I didn't know what the fuck I was doing, C, I wasn't reading a lot, D, I moved out of my house and I was living with my friend and I didn't have a setup to even continue doing it. Am I on D or E? Whatever. So I dropped the project, but then almost a year later, like around the same time, this year, I decided, fuck it. I got a mic now. I've got the camera still. I've lost some weight. I have more charisma. I'm not as depressed. I have a beard. So I decided I was going to do book club again. And I started that by talking about the books that I wanted to read this year. Namely talking about War and Peace, which I started it, got 3 chapters in. They were pretty quick chapters. Stopped reading it because of work and everything, and then I realized I completely forgot what I had read, so I moved my bookmark back. So I need to restart that again. It's always a struggle starting and finishing books with me. I don't know why. Sometimes I can read a book in a week. So other times it takes like 6 months. So that's what we're going to talk about right now, is my reading of 2017. So in 2017, it started out with Boneshaker. I read that in a couple days, mostly because it was really easy, not because I liked it. And my review of it is pretty terrible. Because back then I didn't watch a lot of YouTubers on BookTube who did reviews or any of that sort of thing, so I didn't know how they went. Like I didn't know how much detail I could go into about the book, like about plot or whatever, and I didn't know how to be concise. I didn't know how to be enthusiastic either. Like I was very like, I read a book, it sucked, and it was pretty shitty. Plus the second one I did, it was too heavily edited. Like it was it was jump cutty like some YouTube channels are, but the cuts were bad, and I was cutting off my words. So no more of that. So anyway, started off with Boneshaker. I almost said Bookshaker again. Boneshaker, and I hated it, but I read it because it's steampunk genre, and I'm writing a novel. I talk about this in that last video, so if you want to peruse that, you can. And I read that, and I was still reading through the His Dark Materials trilogy, which is Philip Pullman's books that starts with The Golden Compass, if you know what that one is. And I read the first one in 2015, and it took me 2 years to finish the trilogy. I didn't finish the last book until maybe October of this past year. So it took me a long time to finish that series. And the reason it took me forever, I think I read the second one and the third one in 2017, I'm pretty sure. Unless I read, yeah, I think, I can't remember when I read The Subtle Knife, which is the second one. I'm trying to remember. It's not that important. I know that I didn't read it immediately after The Golden Compass, but it took me forever to read those last two. And I'll go over, I guess I'll go over them a little bit since they're like the next big thing that I read. The Golden Compass trilogy, His Dark Materials, is by Philip Pullman. It follows the story of Lyra. I can't think of her real last name. They call her Lyra Silvertongue in the book because she's really good at lying, and one of the other characters gives her that name because she's really good at lying. But anyway, she lives in this universe where people's souls are outside of their body in the form of an animal called a demon, and there's this weird like entity thing in the universe called dust, which is kind of like space particles or some like weird thing. They go into detail about it, but it's been a while. I can't really remember it. This review is way too far away from when I actually read the book, so that's not that good. But anyway, the major thing is that dust is this like ethereal thing that is around everybody, on everything. It's living. It's this weird thing that the church of her universe doesn't like and thinks it's like original sin and all this kind of shit. But her dad, played by Daniel Craig in the film, is this guy who wants to kill God, called the Almighty, and he wants to use dust. He wants to figure out what dust is, and he wants to use it to help him. And in the first one, they don't really go into the whole subplot of him trying to kill God. It's mostly about Lyra trying to find her friends who get kidnapped by the like one sect of this church. I can't remember what they're called. Again, it's been a while since I've read the book. But turns out her mom is a part of the church who's been stealing kids, and apparently their mission is to sever the link between children and their demons, pretty much cutting their souls out of them. And it's like really dark. And she meets, she goes on this adventure to try and find her best friend who gets kidnapped, and she meets a bunch of weird people, like an aeronaut, this guy from Texas who has a dirigible, and these talking polar bears, and all this kind of fantasy stuff. And the first book is really good. The author, he builds this great world, and it makes sense, and it's engaging. And even though it's generally, I'd say it's a book for middle grade, maybe young adult. It's, as a 20-something who's reading them, I was like super engaged. I read The Golden Compass when I was 25. I could not put it down. I brought it with me to family vacation to Florida, and I think I spent more time reading that book than on the beach, because I loved it. I couldn't put it down. And then when I got home, I bought the trilogy box set. I'm like, oh, I'm going to start reading these, and then I pull and I at the end of the first one, Lyra goes through this portal into another world, and you're like, oh my god, where's she going? And then the second book starts out with a completely different character who is never introduced in the first book because he doesn't exist in the first book, and then it just follows him for a while, and then we learn that he's actually a part of our universe because Lyra is in a different one where the whole animal shape-shifting demon thing. I don't think I said that. They're demons. They're spirit animal things. When they're young, they can shift into different animals, which is pretty cool. But anyway, this kid, I can't remember his name. Again, it's been a while. He lives in our universe, and he's trying to run away from these government types, and it's kind of convoluted. It doesn't really explain that much of why they're after his family. They're like after his dad for some reason or something. I can't remember. It's really dumb. Essentially, the point I'm getting at is the first one is really good, and I loved it. The second one and the third one suck, and I fucking hated them. It took me forever to get through the third book because the stupid, convoluted shit that they got into that didn't make any sense. There wasn't a lot of setup for it. It was just terrible, and I was sitting there like, why do I care about any of this? I don't care how this ends anymore because I just want it to fucking end. Like it was a trudge, and I hated it. So that was my experience with those. So those were some great books. Yeah. I read those in 2017. I think 2017 is when I finished reading the Brothers Karamazov. I can't remember if I finished it in 2016, at the end of 2016 or early 2017. I'm going to say I finished it in early 2017. Yeah. Anyway, The Brothers Karamazov is a novel by Fyodor Dostoevsky, who's a prolific 19th century Russian author. He wrote Crime and Punishment. There you go. And The Brothers Karamazov is a story about three brothers who live in... I don't remember the town they live in. Again, this is way too late to be talking about this because I didn't really think about plot before doing this video. But whatever. It's off the cuff. It's more natural that way. Anyway, The Brothers Karamazov is about these three brothers. Two of them are full brothers, and then the third one is their half-brother. And one of them is a priest in training, the youngest one. The middle child is like an atheist, socialist, nihilist guy. And the oldest one is more like his father. He's just like trying to live his life, and he's kind of like the traditional Russian male of that time period. He is kind of a drunk. He, is kind of a vagabond and doesn't care about money. He used to be in the military, but he squandered a lot of his fortune and his life and everything and like these stupid pursuits and gambling and all this kind of shit. And on the back of the book, it says, it starts with a murder because the oldest brother, Dmitri, kills the three brothers, kills their father, supposedly. But the murder doesn't happen until like 3/4 into the book. Like it is way in there as a plot device. It's nowhere near the beginning of the book. Like a good difference with that is that in Crime and Punishment, which is also about a murder, the murder happens at the end of part 1 of the book. It's a 3-4 part book. Crime and Punishment is, and the murder happens at the end of the first part, and then the rest of it is like his subsequent thing, which I can go into more later when I get to it. But the murder in Brothers Karamazov is so far into the book, you don't even really think about it because and you might be thinking, well, then what's the plot of the book before the murder? A lot of Dostoevsky stuff is about characters. It's not necessarily about a plot device. While in the Brothers Karamazov, he goes into a lot of detail about the brothers, like laying a backstory of all of their characters, explaining who they are, who they were as children, the life that they led, who their father was, since he's a big like influence on all of them, the town they live in, the people that are there, their relationships with other people. It goes really in depth with their lives and their goals and things like that. And it talks about a lot about philosophy and religion and just human interaction in general. And there's a lot of deep stuff in there. And I want to reread it again because I've forgotten more than I remember about that book, and it's been a while. So I'm pretty sure I've finished reading. I didn't start it in 2017. I know that because I think I started in 2016, and it just took me forever to read. Because I remember reading it before I went to camp in 2016, at camp, after camp, in England. I was reading it. Like it took me over a year to read that book, just because I was so inconsistent with reading it. 2017. I read the Halo Reach book. Yeah, the Halo Reach book that explains the precursor to the Halo novel that is about Halo, like the actual ring. The Halo Reach book is about the fall of Reach. I think it's actually called the fall of Reach. It's about recruiting John, who is the Master Chief, and his subsequent journey from training, going on different missions, fighting the Covenant, and then going to Reach. Now, if you're listening to this and I start talking about Halo and you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm not going to go into detail about it because, actually, you know what? That's kind of a dick thing. You know, people who might listen to this might not know what Halo is, so maybe I should be a little charitable. Halo is a game on Xbox that came out in 2001 on the original Xbox and has had sequels out the ass up until now. But it follows it's like this futuristic thing, and it's humans versus these aliens called the Covenant, and the Halo is this ring, this artificially built ring that's floating out in space that is apparently a universe-killing weapon, a galaxy-killing weapon. I don't know. It kills if it's activated. It kills all life in like a certain amount of space. And the Master Chief is a super enhanced soldier he wasn't created to fight the Covenant, but they use him to fight the Covenant. He's super fast, he's super strong, he's super smart. He's like 7 feet tall, built like a truck. And he's the main character of the video games. In the books, it goes into more detail about where he was recruited from, the training he went through, and all that kind of stuff. It's more of like a military novel, things like that. So I read that one. I had read it back in like 2007 when the book had come out. I don't think it... Yeah, I read it when the book came out, like when I was still in high school. And I was perusing books on Barnes & Noble. I'm like, you know what? I'd like to read that. So I bought it and read it again. I also read a book called Ethan Frome, which I can't remember the author's name. It's right behind me, though. Yeah, whatever. Ethan Frome, which is a really short novel. It's like 150 pages. It's more of like a novella or short story. It's short. About this character called Ethan Frome, who there's a narrator who goes to this town in Massachusetts, and he sees this like pretty much disabled guy. Like he's shambling through town as he goes to the post office, and we find out that through like other like stories about him that he used to be like a pretty well known guy in town, and his like that goes into his backstory about his wife being bedridden and how he falls in love with his wife's cousin who's there to like help her, and it's pretty much just like a love story gone wrong. And when I read it, I I was like, God, man, this just sucks for this dude. You know, he just, you know, he got married to this woman and things were okay, but then she got sick and it started to go terrible, and then they brought her cousin in to take care of her. And then, oh shit, sorry, he falls in love with her, and it's just terrible, like how it ends. I won't spoil it, but so I read that. I read The Idiot by Dostoevsky, which is probably my favorite novel of all time right now. And The Idiot is about a character who, when he was young, he used to have really bad epilepsy, and which Dostoevsky had later in life. So he was pulling that from his own life. But this guy who went to Switzerland from Petersburg to meet to this doctor who was taking care of him, and then he goes back home after his parents are dead and the doctor dies, or no, his benefactor dies, and then he goes back home to Petersburg to try and restart his life at 25, but he doesn't know anybody because his family's dead. And he finds some distant relative and starts talking to them. And it's essentially just this guy who is Russian, who hasn't lived in Russia in a really long time, so he doesn't get stuff, and he doesn't have any friends or family there, is trying to rebuild his life. And then he finds out that he's inherited $1 million, so he's rich now, and he's trying to figure out social norms because he's always been kind of weird, because he never really learned anything, because he's always been bedridden because of his epilepsy. And it's just his trials of trying to figure out how to be a good person around everybody. He meets this beautiful woman who is being sought out by 6 different people, including him, and he wants to show her that he loves her despite all the negativity surrounding her. Because she's kind of she's not floozy. She's just a very aloof woman, and she doesn't really care about propriety or anything. She just does whatever she wants to do because she doesn't care. And he sees something deep inside of her, like a goodness in her that only he can see, and he loves her for it. And he would die for her. But there's also another main character who starts out as the main character. His name is Mishkin. Starts out as his friend, and they become romantic rivals in this love triangle. And it just the thing that I really like about Dostoevsky, aside from his plots, is that he writes characters and their interaction so well that it doesn't even feel like fiction. It feels like I'm reading something that really happened, because he writes dialogue so well as if people are actually talking, and I don't know, it's just hard to explain. He captures the human condition in words like no other author I've ever read. He just knew how to take the actions of people and put them into words and show how they felt and what they were thinking, through the entire thing. And when I was done reading The Idiot, I was stunned. I was reading it on my couch. I closed the book and I just sat down and I was just, that sucks, because a lot of his stories are really depressing. Since they are based off of, I wouldn't say based off of real life. They take a lot of cues from things that he's experienced in his life, which a lot of writers do. But his stories don't always end with a happy ending, because real life isn't about happy endings, really, because even when something happy happens in your life, there's always the next bad thing or the next lull that'll come. And happy things are fleeting, and he captures that too. And in The Idiot, at the end, I felt so bad for the main character because when I was reading, I read the introduction, and because it's a translation from Russian, obviously, and the translators were talking about how when Dostoevsky was talking to his friend about writing this novel, he wanted to write a character who was like the most beautiful man he could imagine. And not beautiful in form, but beautiful in mind. That he was selfless, that he was naive, that he was innocent in some way. And that made him beautiful, and that made him something to aspire to be like. And when I read through that novel, and I, saw a lot of me in the main character, not everything, but a lot of the struggles and a lot of the strife and the pain. And at the end, I'm not going to spoil it, but at the end, it doesn't end well. And I was just stunned and sad. And, I had one of those moments like, wow, this book is over. Like, what am I going to do now? Like, that is definitely my biggest, until I read Crime and Punishment, that was like my biggest, like, what the fuck moment. Coming like with a book and like having such an emotional attachment. And that's probably why it's my favorite, is that it just hit so many things at home with me. And it was written so well and so engaging. I read that, like, it took me over a year to read the Brothers Karamazov, which it is a bigger book, but it's written by the same guy. I read The Idiot in a week, like less than a week. I could not put that book down. And then after The Idiot, I'm trying to think of what I read, because I didn't really read much over the summer, because I read The Idiot, Ethan Frome, and Halo Reach all back to back. And then, let me see if there's anything on my bookshelf that, no, I think... no, I didn't read that until I got back. Yeah, I didn't read anything over the summer that I can remember. When I got back, I read some more Dostoevsky. I read Notes from the Underground, which is a critique on the human condition in a more brazen way, talking about like his biggest point in it is how humanity, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, is that humanity exists. How should I put this? Humanity does better in strife than in complacency, or in contentment, I guess. Complacency is not the right word. Contentment is a better word. Humanity does better in strife than it does in contentment. And he talks, in his analogy, he uses, if we ever got to utopia, any form of utopia, we would find a way to destroy it, because we don't do well in something like in a perfect world. It's not good enough, or we can't find comfort in it because of our human nature. And it's pretty interesting reading that. It's a quick read. I think you would actually do really well, at least the first half of the book. It's 2 parts. Would be done really well as a monologue, like done on a stage. That's how I imagined it when I read it, and I think it would be pretty interesting to hear that. And then the second part, the character talks about some interaction he had with a prostitute, which, me explaining it really quickly, you're like, well, why? What? But it's actually another like really good critique on the human condition and how we interact with people and everything. So I would very much tell people to read any Dostoevsky if they're interested in reading more about the human condition in general in a more fictionalized way. After Notes from the Underground, I read Crime and Punishment finally, and that, again, just like The Idiot, is like one of my top favorite books I've ever read. If you don't know about Crime and Punishment, if you didn't go to high school, Crime and Punishment is about a guy who murders his landlord for the money, and then the punishment The crime is the murder. The punishment isn't him being arrested or whatever. It's the inner turmoil he has and the guilt and him living with killing somebody and wanting to turn himself in but not wanting to ruin his own life for his family's sake and all this kind of stuff. And it is written so well. You get so far into the character's mind that you can sympathize with his mental state of why he did what he did and why he is the way he is and everything. It's just written so well that you can sympathize with a guy who murdered 2 people, and not sympathize in the way that you pat him on the back and say good job, but you can get inside of his head and understand for him why he did it. Maybe not forgive him, but you can sympathize and say, you know, you got a lot of shit going on. You're fucked up. I can see why you did what you did. I don't approve of it, but it's, you know, it's just, again, his stuff is a critique and a spotlight on the human condition and how we live our lives and how we think and all that kind of stuff. So I read that, and then I started, I think the last book I read paperback was the Notes from a Dead House, which is another Dostoevsky, which is a fictionalized version of his stay in a Siberian hard labor prison in his 20s when he was convicted of being a political dissenter or something. He was arrested for being a part of some socialist movement in the 1820s, 1830s, and he was sent to a Siberian work prison for 4 years because of it. And he wrote this book as kind of like a fictionalized memoir of his stay there. And again, it doesn't really have much of a plot. It's more of a reminiscence of being in prison and explaining what prison life is like and the kind of people that are there. It doesn't have a to Z like story that we follow. It's him just like explaining his time there from his first day through the different holidays, through different working conditions and stuff like that. And it's more of just like a peek into the life of a prisoner, whether or not they're in America or whatever. I would consider that this is a view of what it's like for a prisoner. It doesn't matter where they are, except for maybe some of the conditions, but I mean the mentality of the people. So that was interesting to read. And then that was the last book I read. And I was going to go into audiobooks too, but I think I'll save that for a separate book club video, and we can talk about how we want to view audiobooks in this, realm of reading, since audiobooks are more passive. But by my count, Brothers, The Idiot, Crime and Punishment, The Two Notes, Halo, Ethan, the trilogy. I read at least 10 books this year. That's pretty interesting. Most books I've read, that's the most amount of books I've read in a year. But that pales in comparison to some people on here. Like I watched a video of a YouTuber, her name's Reagan. She, I think in 2017 or 2016, she read over 50 books in a year. That's ridiculous. I think it was like 60 something. That's insane. That's more than a book a week. And she reads like fantasy and shit like that. And I'm like, how? How in the hell do you read that many books? But That wasn't. And I didn't even go over the books I tried to start reading and I didn't finish, like the Fellowship of the Ring 3 times. But I don't even know how long this is. This is going pretty long. I think I'm over half an hour already. Shit, yeah. All right, I'm gonna end this. But yeah, it was fun. Next video, I think I'll talk about audiobooks and we can try and figure out what we think about those.